And I would like to welcome you to a Voteless People is a Hopeless People webinar. And the event is hosted by Sigma Omicron Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And it's hosted as a part of the fraternity's national programs and community outreach and mentoring initiatives that have been adopted by the organization's governing body and mandated for implementation by all of its chapters. A Voteless People is a Hopeless People is initiated as a national program of Alpha Phi Alpha during the 1930s. In the 1990s, the focus was shifted to include political awareness and empowerment, delivered most frequently through town meetings and candidate forums. During the 2020 pandemic crisis, which is also a critical election year, Alpha chapters around the globe are focusing on adhering to the values and initiatives which they pledge to uphold by finding alternate ways to service the community members within the footprint. Our goal and our call to action is to educate the community on voting rights, how to register to vote, and the importance of the 2020 census. So we want to get registered, we want to go vote, and we want to complete the census. All of these things are important for number one, exercising your right to vote. Then number two, you want to be counted so that you will count in terms of resources that go to your community. So it's very important that you listen in today, gain the information that is needed in order for you to be successful this election year and election years beyond, and also census years beyond. I have a host of panelists, and I will introduce them as we go along. I myself am Darryl Langford. I am the Vice President of Sigma Omicron Lambda, and I will be your moderator today. I am also the City Councilman of Fayetteville here in Fayetteville, Georgia. We also have a host of brothers and sisters who will be participants in this panelist of Voteless People is a Hopeless People. Brother A.C. Cooley will be our co-host. And Brother A.C. Cooley will brief you on Zoom etiquette, and I'll just submit questions for Q&A, and we'll work with slides for each presenter. We have our first panelist is Brenda Cox. Brenda Cox is with the NAACP here in Fayette County, and she's over their voters initiative for the NAACP. We also have Darryl Anderson. Darryl Anderson is over voters registration and voters information and education for Fayette County. We have Representative Derrick Jackson for District 64. Derrick Jackson will be discussing voter suppression. We have our panelist, Darryl Hicks. Darryl Hicks is over the elections board. He is the chairman for Fayette County. And we have Ed Reed. Ed Reed is director of a Fair Count for census for the organization of Fair Count. At this time, I'm going to introduce our president of Sigma Omicron Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha, is Brother W. Earl Hines, and he's going to give you a president's message for Sigma Omicron Lambda. Brother Hines.
Good morning, and thank you, Brother Brother Langford. It's my pleasure this morning to welcome our participants to A Voteless People is a Hopeless People Voting Rights Forum. At no time in our nation's history has it been more important for us to exercise our right to vote. And we are exceedingly glad that you chose to spend this time with us learning about your rights and the power of your vote. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this forum would not be possible without our partners at Fair Count, as well as the Fayette County NAACP. We hope that you'll leave this forum determined to make your vote count, not just this year or this election, but it is our sincere desire that you leave here committed to voting at every opportunity, at every level, from local to state to national. Again, we welcome you and we hope you are enriched by this forum.
All right, thank you, Brother President. Okay, now we're going to move into our first speaker of the day, and that is Brenda Cox, who is the Political Action Chair for Fayette County NAACP, where she will be discussing voter education.
Good morning, and thank you, Alpha Phi Alpha, for inviting me. It is very delightful to be here, and I appreciate the fact that I'll be able to work with you all, and thank you very much. Would you please move the first slide down, please? What is a provisional ballot? A provisional ballot is very important. It allows a voter to cast a ballot even if he hasn't met all the requirements for doing so, as far as having his identification. The provisional ballot will count if everything is solved by 3 days after the election day. So when you go to cast your vote, even if you do not have on all of you, which we hope that you do, but if you don't have all of your identification, they are to issue you a provisional ballot, and you have 3 days to solve it after the election day. Next slide, please. Reason for voting a provisional ballot. First reason is you're unable to show your required form of identification, your photo ID, when you voted in person. Second, you registered to vote online and you did not have your ID at that time when you voted online. So when you go to vote, they need your ID and you don't have the correct ID with you. Or your name doesn't appear on the list of registered voters in the precinct. And then another very important reason is when I was a poll, also worked in the polls as a poll manager, I found the main reason is that a lot of the voters, they would go to the wrong precinct. And if they come to the wrong precinct, we still have to offer them a provisional ballot, especially if it's like 30 minutes before closing. Next slide, please. So you're voting. So you voted using a provisional ballot. Yes. The most important thing about it is you have 3 days from the close of the polls to present your acceptable ID to your county register for your vote to count. If by the third day after the election to determine if you have not presented it within 3 days, they do have the option that your vote will not count. Next slide, please. Will my vote count? One of the things that is a misdemeanor is that if you vote in a certain precinct on a provisional, but you're supposed to be at another precinct, it depends on the candidates. If you're voting, let's say in District 1, that is not your precinct, and you're supposed to be voting in District 2, that is your precinct, and the candidates are different. Let's say 3/4 of the candidates are different. Well, the only 1/4 of the candidates that you have voted for in District 1 that belong in District 2 will be counted for. Any of the candidates that are in District 1 will not be, District 2 will not be counted because that is not your actual district. I hope I explained that well. Let me go over that one more time. Let's see that in District 2, the Board of Education, there's a Board of Education candidate, but in District 1, there isn't. And you voted in District 1, but you should have voted in District 2. Well, then your vote, you won't have an eligible vote for that Board of Education candidate because you voted in District 1, because there wasn't, that District 2 candidate was not in District 1. So your ballot will be partially counted for. Next slide, please. Poll workers. What is a poll worker? Poll workers are the backbone of the election system. They secure safety and also they are the democracy. Without poll workers, we wouldn't be able to vote. The County Board of Election and Registration, are responsible for selecting and training all poll workers. Poll workers they do not work for free. They are compensated. And they work on, they work early voting and election day. Next slide, please. Qualifications. To be a poll worker, you must be at least 16 years of age. And some of you may say, 16 years? Well, it changed. It used to be 18, but because of the virus and all, and the desperate need of poll workers, we now go to 16 years of age. You have to be able to read, write, speak the English language, and no felony convictions. A poll worker cannot be a candidate for a public office or hold a public office other than a political party office while seeking to be a poll worker. A parent, a spouse, a child, a brother, a father-in-law, a mother-in-law, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, brother-in-law, or sister of a candidate cannot serve as a poll worker in any precinct where the candidate is listed on the ballot. And that's very important, that we don't have anybody working as a poll worker and their brother is running in the same, running in that same precinct, let's say for a city council position. What are the poll workers' duties? Well, one of the main things of the poll workers is that are assigned to the precinct, they have to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning on time. They must be in place, and all the polls, and they have to be in place so that when the voters come at 7 o'clock in the morning, there is at least 3 poll workers there. They have to sign in. All the signage for that precinct has to be set up. The machines have to be calculated to 0, and they have to take an oath. And although the polls close at 7 p.m., the poll workers' work is not done at 7 p.m. They have a lot of counting for and putting away material securely. And also they have to make sure that everything balances out as far as the machines, the accuracy of the machines. As I mentioned before, on election day, the poll worker will take their oath. They have a badge. They have posts and position electric signs, and they ensure that the voting equipment is tested and ready for the voter. Next slide, please. Who really votes? Now, this is interesting. Voters turn out in Fayette County. election day. 88,758 registered voters. Of that 88,758,000 registered voters, 12,765 cards were cast. Voter cast 12,765. That was 14.38%. Also, the total was 88,758,000. Cards cast was 35,063. Voter cast was 35,063. And the turnout was only 39.50%. That's pretty low. The advance voting, the registered vote, 88,758. Cards cast, 4,734. Voters cast, 4,734. Percentage turnout, 5.33%. That's for advance voting. Absentee by mail, 88,758. Cards cast, 17,554. Voters cast, 17,554. Turnout, 19.78%. Provisionals, 88,000 registered voters, 88,758. Cards cast, 10. Voters cast, 10. Turnout percentage, 0.01%. So we got a lot of work to do. We only had 39.50% of the whole turnout, or the voter turnout in Fayette County. Next slide, please. Voters in the United States. In 2016, voter turnout increased 65.3% for non-Hispanic whites, but decreased for others. And we have a chart here. The reported voting rate by race and Hispanic origin. The orange is the white line for white and non-Hispanic. And it started off at 66.2%. And at the end of 2016, it went up to 65.3%. The blue is the Black and non-Hispanic. It started off in 1980 at 54.0%. And then we went to 59.6% in 2016. The other race is non-Hispanic, and that's the purple. Now the purple line started off at 53.1%, and then it ended up in 2016 at 49.3%. So that's a decrease. And then the Hispanic, which is the orange brown, it started off at 46.0%, and it went to 47.6%. So you can see here that we do have to try work and get everybody out to vote, and see by the numbers who is voting and who's not. Next slide, please. Okay, now this slide, the highlight of it is that in 2016, this slide found that white voters and older voters increased. So in 2020, what we need to do is to work on getting an increase in voters on all race and ages. Next slide, please. Precinct hours. Early advance voting. Fayette County, early voting begins on October 12th, 2020. Early voting are as follows. October the 12th to the 23rd, 2020, 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. Saturday morning, which is, note that is a Saturday day, and that means you can go and vote early. October 24th, 2020, it's at 9 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. October 26th to the 30th, 2020, early, 7 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. Next slide, please.
Now, Brenda, before we move forward, probably want to express how important it is to try to vote as early as you can.
Yes.
And I say that because, especially with the uncertainty, with what's happening with our voting process, the earlier we vote, the better off we'd be. So get to the polls early.
Get to the polls early, and the dates and the times are convenient so that you can get to the polls early because of the problems with the United States Post Office. And if you have absentee ballots, which I will discuss later, you want to make sure that your absentee ballot is counted. And if you're mailing it, you need to mail that absentee ballot at least 2 weeks ahead of time, because there is a problem with the post office delivering the mail on time, and you have to have it post dated no later than November the 3rd, the day of the election. So the earlier you get out to vote, the better it is. And those dates are great for you, and the times, so that you can go out and vote early and you don't have to stand in line on November the 3rd. And here we have the locations. Fayette County Election Office. We have Peachtree City Library. We have Fayette County Public Library. And we have Tyrone Town City Hall. All of these locations are perfect, where if you live in any of these locations, you will be able to go there and vote early. Next slide, please. Election Day voting hours. 2020 Election Day is November the 3rd, 2020. The hours are from 7 in the morning to 7 p.m. In all cities having a population of 300,000 or more, polling places will remain open until 8 p.m. Plan your vote, and that's the important thing. Plan your vote. This is a very important election, so don't just say, well, I'll vote. Plan it. Go to the website, www.mvp.sos.ga.gov, and you can confirm your voting location and your active registration. Yesterday I went to it. I got a copy of my ballot. It told me what precincts that I'm located in. It gives you a lot of information, and that way you can plan your vote. You know who you're going to vote for. You have a copy of your ballot. They have a sample copy of your ballot there. Next slide, please. Absentee ballots. That's the talk right now. Georgia allows absentee ballots by mail or by person. And there is no excuse for you not to be able to use an absentee ballot, because you have up to 180 days before the election. The deadline to request an absentee ballot is October the 30th, 2020. And you can turn in your absentee ballots as long as they are dated November the 3rd, the day of election. They still, if you want to bring it up to your precinct. But I would suggest that you mail that absentee ballot at least 2 weeks before, as soon as you get it. And they're starting out now to send out the absentee ballots September the 15th. So it's important that you take this very seriously and that you mail them out as soon as you receive it. And again, you can go online and look at your sample ballot so you won't be surprised when you get it in the mail. Next slide, please. Voter Protection Hotline. That number you call if you have any problems when you're at the polling location. You can call for assistance. Suppose, as an example, if you go to your polling location and they don't want to give you which they are supposed to give you a provisional ballot, and you are there and you can also call that number 1-888-730-5816. But the polling manager at the location, they are supposed to give you provisional ballots. But if you have any problems, that's where you should go. And thank you again. And if you have any questions, I'm glad to be able to answer them.
Okay, if you have any questions, let's go ahead and put them in the question answering queue. And towards the end of the presentations, we will answer all your questions. Next, we're going to move with voter registration. And this will be presented by Darryl Anderson, who is also with voter registration here in Fayette County, Georgia. Darryl?
I'm making I'm muting it. Hello?
Hello?
Hi. All right, can you hear me? I'm Darryl Anderson. And I do voter registrations. I'm also known as a political junkie around here in Fayetteville, Georgia, Fayette County, Metro Atlanta. I've been a poll manager now for the past 17 years. Our voter education schedule, and once again, thank you so very much, Alpha Phi Alphas and Darryl Langford. I have a special bond for Darryl Langford because I told him he had to run for office. Anyway, on our Georgia voter schedule, the deadline for voter registration is October the 5th. Once again, the deadline for voter registration is October the 5th. That is so critically important because we've got to make certain in the next couple of weeks, we have got a lot of people to in contact, get them registered, and put them on the polls on the data sheet. October the 12th, advanced voting begins. I cannot emphasize that enough. I'm hoping that we'll have vigorous turnout on every day of advanced voting. October the 24th, Saturday voting day. I hope we'll have a line that extends from the precincts or the voting sites all the way out into the parking lots. October the 30th, deadline to request ballot by mail. And the urgency is that I would not wait.
Okay, we seem to have lost Brenda.
until October the 30th. But better late than never, but try to get these requests to all the way out to the street. That's just my opinion, but I want to see the line extended all the way out to the street until 7 o'clock. I think Representative Derrick Jackson can give you a good example of how it is important to be in line by 7 o'clock, no matter how long the line is. And of course, December the 7th is your general runoff. Next slide, please. Voter eligibility. Who can vote? A U.S. citizen, age 18, a legal resident of the United States, a legal resident of Georgia, have not been found mentally incompetent by the court and not currently serving their sentence for felon or moral turpitude, and be registered to vote and able to show valid ID. Next slide, please.
Hey, Ms. Darryl,
Yes.
what are some of the issues with felons?
Oh, I'm going to
People-
talk about that in just a moment.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right, a word about ex-felons. In 2018, 264,000 Georgians were disenfranchised, provided because they were known felons or convicted felons. They provided physical incarceration and let me just read this. Let me just deviate just for a moment. Upon completion of the sentence, the ex-felon will need to register to vote in order to become active. Registration is free and right. Felons must pay their fines. Felons can owe restitution. They can owe restitution, but they must pay all court fines and any other fines. You will also need to have a non-felon affidavit is an affirmation of eligibility to vote. Your felony sentence is considered completed, even if you have outstanding monetary obligations other than the fines, such as I said, unpaid restitutions. It is critically important if we know of a person who has completed who is a known felon or have completed their services in incarceration and probation or parole, that we encourage them to register to vote. I myself, as a deputy registrar, I have actually registered three former felons. I personally did this because I know them. They're part of my community. I insisted they register to vote, and I made certain that they had completed everything, and I made certain that on election day, they voted. So that's what you have to do. I think all of us probably know, at least maybe, I won't say all of us, but if you know of anyone who has completed their probation and or parole, ask them, have they paid their fines, and would they like to get registered? I also encourage you to give them the voter registration form with their proper ID. And if they have a problem, the elections office, upon receipt of the application, will contact their parole office. They will go on their database to find out if they're clear to and have completed all services and requirements so that they can become a registered voter. So please, we have overlooked hundreds of thousands of persons that could have probably voted because they have, they were felons and just did not get to that point where somebody took the time to ask them, would you like to register to vote? Next slide, please. Where to register? We have several voting websites. First of all, you can go to My Voter page, Secretary of State's office, My Voter page at www.mbp.sos.georgia.gov. We have FayetteVotes.org, RockTheVote.org, When We All Vote, which is a new site, a new voter registration project initiated by Michelle Obama and others. We have Fair Vote here in Georgia. We have Vote.org and IWillVote.org, and of course, TurboVote. Let me give you an example of something I do on a regular basis. I normally go pick up my groceries at Kroger's. Everyone who's put any groceries in my box, in my trunk, I ask them, are they registered to vote? I'm adamant. And I have my TurboVote cards right there. And on the other side of my car seat, I have voter registration forms. I went to Dollar General the other day. Young couple was coming out and I said, are you registered to vote? They looked at me like, who is this crazy old woman? But do you know they were not registered and I got them registered. So it is critically important that each one of us ask someone, are they registered to vote? And I make it a habit of doing so every day. I have given out oodles and oodles and oodles of TurboVote cards, and I always carry my voter registration forms with me. Also, another thing that's critically important, you can, if your driver's license are expired, but we'll talk about that on election day. Next slide, please. On election day, on your roll on election day, you must vote at your designated polling place. Check your registration. Those in line by 7 p.m. will be permitted to vote. As I pointed out, Representative Derrick Jackson can give you an idea of what it's like to have a line that's almost 2 miles long at 7 o'clock. But if it takes until 2 a.m., they are permitted to vote. Campaigning is not permitted within 100 feet of any polling place. I'm sorry. Voters are not permitted to wear any kind of paraphernalia. As a poll manager, I had one young lady to come in with a t-shirt with a campaign, and I had her to go to the restroom and turn it over so she could come back and vote. I've also had candidates who come into the precinct with their magnetic signs. I've told them that they had to remove their magnetic signs. I've had another gentleman with a pin on his cap. I told him he had to go back out and remove the pin from his cap. And those are those things that they think that it's okay, but it is not. And as a poll manager, you cannot allow them to come in. Also, I'm also seeing here in Fayette County, we have poll managers with bumper stickers of known candidates on their bumper stickers. This is something I'm going to be talking with that's prohibited. That's prohibited, but we all try to get away with as much as we can. If you have moved in the voter information, this is something I just want to throw out. That is not on and it does not match your voter registration site. Your manager should be can allow you to vote provisional, and the poll manager will have you do a change of address. We have in our on your voter registration forms, there is a change of address. I think it's number 8 or 9 on the voter registration form. But you can vote, and you should be able to be allowed to vote provisional and do a change of address. You will also have students who have sometimes moved or possibly just registered and they're not in the data system. Allow them to vote provisional. It's quite simple. I'm, a true component of provisional voting. So in the last general election, I had one college student who had just recently registered, and I had them to vote provisional, just to make certain. All right. And next slide, please. Also, one other thing too, let me just also say this. I encourage young people to use their parents' address as their permanent address until they become, until later for during their college years. Voter identification examples.
Hey, Ms. Darryl, I just got one question.
Yes.
What if a person goes to the poll and you know they are not registered for that particular location, and the poll workers try to stop them from voting? What should they do?
Well, I try to find them, first of all, in the state data system. We take that first step. Try to find them in the county data system and then in the state system to see exactly where they may be located. If they're listed in the state or in the county in another precinct, and as Brenda said earlier, if it's late in the day or they cannot get to their designated polling place, I let them vote provisional.
Okay.
As I said, I urge the provisional to be utilized because the final decision will always be the election office. And so I want them to have, I want them to be able to vote on election day. So I'm not going to send them to hither, thither, unless I know that they are, say, from Fulton County or Clayton County. And I've had persons, because my polling place is so close to Clayton, who wanted to vote, but resided in their polling places within Clayton County. Well, I had to tell them they needed to go there because they had ample time.
Okay, so you know, sometimes you have those poll workers that insist that they will not vote because they are not, because I've ran into this before. So in that case, what would they do? Would they call the hotline then?
Yes, call the hotline, get the name of the manager, the precinct, and also the person, because we all wear badges, the name of the person who turned you away, and file a complaint. File a complaint. You have the right to vote on election day, even if it is provisional. I try not to turn anybody away unless it's, you know, that's why I'm adamant about provisional. But get that information, call the hotline, and file a complaint.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you. You can
Well,
continue.
thank you. Voter identification examples. We have the, which have to be presented when you vote. You have your Georgia license, your Georgia ID, which is issued by your registrar's office in your county. You have the Indian tribe license, United States military ID, student ID. Those who are enrolled in Georgia schools, only the Georgia school. You cannot use a Morehouse College ID, and your tribal ID. Also, you can also use U.S. government employee IDs and Georgia employment IDs. And all of them must be and not expired. Now, however, if your Georgia license has expired, you are still allowed to vote. Just because it's expired, if it matches, if your Georgia license matches your location, your residence, you are still allowed to vote. We have had, in my precinct, I have a large number of seniors. So I've had seniors whose license have expired, but because they still reside at the same address, they are allowed to vote on election day. Next I'm sorry. Next slide, please. The sample ballot. The Secretary of State's office now has sample ballots available for review on the my voter page. How and the local election offices, such as Fayette County, should have theirs next week. They were hoping to get them this week, but they should have them in place for review next week. And I encourage persons to get copies of them and check with your local county voter registration offices?
Darryl,
Yes.
this is Darryl Hicks. Let me just make one correction to that. We just heard from Secretary of State's office that they are no longer going to produce these sample ballots.
No. I'm
So it's
sorry. I
not
didn't know
going,
that.
yes, so it's not going to be out there on the website, but what we're trying to do is produce a not a sample ballot, but a ballot that shows everybody that's running for office, because it'd be a little bit more difficult for us to produce it. The main thing that folks probably need to do is, they can go to my voter page and see where their precinct and who are their current elected officials. But they won't get this sample ballot anymore. And Secretary of State we learned that just the end of this week, that they're not going to do that. So we'll have more information on that, okay?
Thank
And
you so
it'll be
much,
on our website.
Darryl, because I was told on Tuesday, when I called, that they were anticipating getting sample ballots next week. But
Yes.
these are things that will be fluid. It's everything is fluid at this present moment.
Okay,
Right.
Brother Hicks, if I may ask, what is the reasoning for that?
I can't answer that, Brother Langford, for the Secretary of State. My guess is that they're probably bombarded, or the workload, or whatever the case may be. It certainly shifts that responsibility back to the counties. And it's a task to try to present a ballot for every single voter in every district of the county, as well as showing their statewide votes. Obviously, every voter has a right to vote for the statewide voter candidates. So my guess is it's cost and time issues. Darryl, I'm not sure of the specific reason though.
Well,
All right.
I want to thank you all. Thank you, Councilman Langford and the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, for allowing me to be a member of your panel today. It has been an honor and a pleasure, and I thank you very much for this opportunity. And if I can answer any questions, as I said, I'm a political junkie, so I tried to find out. All right.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Anderson, and we appreciate your contribution. Next, we're going to move on to Brother Representative Derrick Jackson, who is the state representative for House District 64. And Brother Jackson is going to discuss voter suppression and ways to mitigate being caught up in a situation where it's difficult for you to vote. So I thank you, Brother Jackson, for being on this panel, and I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Brother Langford. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
All right, let us proceed. So just for the audience's sake, I'm not going to read each of these bullets on the slide. However, I will provide some commentary. The reason being because when you, for example, if you Google what's the definition of voter suppression, various organizations, various federal and state agencies, they all have a different definition on what is voter suppression. In the end, I will summarize it this way, that there are strategies and tactics that are implemented that are used to influence the outcome of an election. And so just to give you, and we'll go through some examples here later on in the presentation, but for example, a good voter suppression that we constantly hear right now is when you have someone at the federal level in a high leadership position that says there's fraud in our election system, or it's going to be jerry rigged, especially when you make those ill statements with no empirical data to support their claim, right? That is a form of voter suppression. I would say this, as the audience Google what is voter suppression and learn of all the different definitions, there is a reason why voter suppression is implemented, and that is to deter you from voting. And so we're going to dig a little deeper here in this presentation, but the bottom line is it is illegal for someone to deny you of your right to vote. That's the bottom line. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? That's the main question. 7 years ago, the Supreme Court struck down the pre-clearance requirement of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and simply meaning that before any state can implement changes to their election laws, they had to go and get approval from the federal government, specifically from the Department of Justice. So when the Supreme Court struck that pre-clearance requirement down, immediately we witnessed 11 states, primarily all southern states, immediately started implementing changes to their voting laws in their state. Things such as exact match, and this predominantly negatively impacted women because women changed their names. Some names are hyphenated, some names may or may not have their maiden name. So there's a plethora of combinations. But in Georgia, for example, if you did not have an exact match, that exact match allowed for the Secretary of State in Georgia to basically remove north of 60% of women who were married that did not have an exact match from the voter roll. And those types of things, when started to occur, and again, in the southern states, after the Supreme Court struck down the pre-clearance requirement of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It basically forced, right now it's forcing the Congress to come up with new legislation. You probably have heard already about the late Congressman John Lewis voting rights bill that simply reinstates the pre-clearance. There's several things, but this is a significant one because it then elevates this pre-clearance requirement back to the federal government and say, before states can implement something that has something to do with their election laws, they have to get advanced federal approval. Next slide. Now, voting suppression tactics didn't just happen during the Trump's administration, contrary to popular belief. In fact, voting suppression tactics, some of the early voting suppression tactics was identified back in the late 1800s. To my research, some says as early as this country was formed could be a voting suppression tactics when you identify the whole setup of the electoral college. But that's a different presentation altogether. But in 1890, poll taxes was the first identified voting suppression tactics, and that poll taxes basically what they were using a literacy test. If you were a person of color or you were did not have financial means, you were, in other words, poor, they will ask some educated question, and if you did not sufficiently answer the question, they denied you the right to vote. And again, this was largely done across southern states. Obviously, it was after the Emancipation Proclamation, and so they were starting this movement of implementing voting suppression tactics. Just to give you some more examples, next slide, please. and this is just the top 7, right? There are a plethora of voter suppression tactics. But when you think about like gerrymandering, for example, and if I may take the personal privilege just to make another plug for the census, ladies and gentlemen, for you to complete your census before September 30th, you can do that online, my2020census.gov. And the reason why I'm highlighting the census because it's done every 10 years, but the political party that's in power have the tools to be able to create the drawing of the congressional district lines. And gerrymandering took place where a governor back up in Massachusetts basically did some maneuvering of the state so he can remain in power. And so there's some history around gerrymandering. But the bottom line is the party that's in power gets to draw the congressional district lines. And it's just apropos that we're talking about gerrymandering and census because the census is done every 10 years, and this is the year, anytime the year ends in 0. Also, another voting suppression tactic is like, as it was already mentioned, about, felons. When Miss Brenda was talking about it, if a person committed a crime and they satisfied their requirement to society, their debt to society, they should be reinstated to have the ability to vote. And but when states prevent felons from voting, then again, that is another voter suppression tactic because now you extending their crime, if you will, for a lifetime after they've already paid a debt to society. I've already mentioned about voter ID mismatch is another one. And then another one that we're starting to see significantly are with college students, right? When you talk about college students ID, and different states have different laws around college students and things of that nature. So again, the bottom line, voter suppression tactics are designed to basically influence the outcome of an election. Next slide, so we can take a look at some other examples, right? Because when you think about what we're seeing today, it's really becoming a little bit more clever, right? You have candidates or campaigns, I should say, out there providing fake voicemails, messages to voters saying that, hey, we look forward to seeing you on voting day on November 10th. And so people lock in November 10th when actually the election day is November 3rd, right? So things like that, you may say, oh, that was a mistake or a Freudian slip or et cetera. No, they're being very clever. Or to say things like, the election might be jerry-rigged or there's fraud. And again, there's no empirical data to support their claim. That's another example. Scare tactics, purging individuals from the roll within 120 days of the election. That's another voting suppression tactic. Why would you purge citizens, law-abiding citizens, from their role, 4 months prior to the election? Okay, next slide, please. So in the end, the bottom line is this. When you think about as early as the 1800s, again, some people believe voting suppression tactics were well before that. And we continue to see it today. As Ms. Darryl Anderson alluded to it, June of this year, where we had, the lines were so long and individuals were standing in line for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours and up until midnight to cast their ballot, all because machines ran out of paper, right? Why wouldn't you make sure that the machines have enough paper to support the election, or power supply, power source, or have a contingency plan if the voting machines were, became broken at a polling precinct? Do you have other machines that can quickly be disseminated to the precincts? Or when you change precincts at the last minute, and that is very difficult in today's world to communicate that out to the masses. And so people would say, well, we put it in the newspaper. Well, how many citizens actually still get a newspaper delivered to their house, or pick up a newspaper when they're at the grocery store? Most citizens get their digital news online, and it may not be the local newspaper, which could be the legal organ for that particular county. And so, again, people are doing clever things to deny citizens of their right to vote. It is a right, and that's the reason why I stress the word right. Is not a privilege, it is a right. And so these tactics, again, in a lot of areas are illegal, and but unfortunately, by the time they're brought before justice, the election has already been called. Things can get tied up in a lawsuit. We all remember the days of the hanging Chad, and back in 2000. And so these tactics are alive and well. And again, these 6 slides, just briefly, just wanted to highlight. And we have a voter protection hotline that will be shared. But when you see these things, bring it to the attention of the elected officials, and so that way we can quickly address it. And that concludes my presentation. But I also would like to say, before I wrap up, going back to Ms. Darryl Anderson's point, ensure that everyone in your household is registered to vote, and make sure you have a plan to vote. And if you go and vote early, because early voting starts October 12th, instead of waiting until November 3rd, if you go and vote October 12th, that gives ample time for us to correct the situation, so you can properly make sure you can cast your vote and it is accepted for this year's election.
All right, Brother Jackson. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. That's outstanding information. Again, we will take all questions at the end. Give Brother Derrick Jackson a round of applause for that great presentation. Next, we're moving to voting machine refresher, and where Brother Darryl Hicks, who is the Board of Elections Chair for Fayette County, will give us some information on the newer voting machines, and discuss a little bit about the drop boxes. So our Brother Darryl Hicks, thank you for coming aboard, sir, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brother Langford. Let me, before I get started, make one correction. You can still go out to My Voters page and print your sample ballot. You just won't have those composite ballots to take into the polls. You'll have to print your own and take it with you. So it is still out there for your specific, but if you want to get a composite ballot that shows everything that's going on in the county, that won't be available to you as it has been in the past. So just want to make sure I make that correction. Ms. Darryl Anderson is correct. By the way, let me thank Darryl for her role as a poll manager. In my role as a board member for the elections and office is we're responsible for how elections take place in the county. So if anything goes wrong with it, not only do they sue the county, but they sue Darryl Hicks as well, and the other board members. Our board is made up of 3 people, one appointed by the Democratic Party, one appointed by the Republican Party, and one appointed by the governing entity of the county, and that's the Board of Commissioners. So That's our role. We are responsible for the director of elections and all staff members, and then we actually approve all poll managers and poll workers. So those folks are doing an outstanding job of helping us carry out election. And Darryl is one of our leaders who have been doing it for years, and she is definitely an expert on it. All right, as it relates to the voting machines, if you can go to the next slide. So we talked about this right before the June elections of the new machines, and all of you that have voted and you voted in previous election, you had a chance to experience a new machine. But just as a refresher, once you walk into the poll, your ID is scanned. It goes back to what Darryl Anderson was talking about in terms of a valid ID. She mentioned that you can use state ID and college students can use their college ID. And she also said this, and I want to reinforce it. It's only college IDs for state schools. You cannot use a private school college ID as a form of identification. It is a state school, which means that it's a state ID that you can use for a form of identification. But anyway, that ID is scanned in. The poll worker will then recognize you because your information will come up. They'll get you to validate the information and you'll sign. Once you sign, they will print a program card that has all of your specific voting information on it, your precinct, the folks that you will vote for. Next slide, please. All right, once you do that, it's very similar to what you did with the previous machines. You would go in and insert your card and your information will come up on the screen. You will then start to make your selections. You will choose who you want to vote for. You'll get a chance to look at that and make sure that it's correct, even before you say, okay, print my ballot. So after you look at it, you can print your ballot. Next slide, please. Once you print your ballot, you will actually have a physical copy in your hand, and then you can then do your final review on your selections. You can make sure that every choice you wanted, every person you wanted to vote for, that you actually selected that person. You know, a lot of times folks go into, in the past, they would go in and the machine, in some instances have been proven where it changes something. I don't know how that happened, but nevertheless, it happens. When it changes something, whether there's a technical issues or whatever the case may be, you had to go to your poll worker and try to get it corrected. In this case, if you get a chance that if it is incorrect, you can go directly to the poll manager and say, this is incorrect, and they can change it. Do not put it in a scanner, because if you put it in a scanner, your vote has been cast. Also, the other thing that I want to know, if you go to the next slide, please. The other thing that I want to note here, if you do not scan it, let's say you look at it and you say, this is exactly what I want, you fold that piece of paper up and walk out of the precinct. If you walk out of the precinct with that piece of paper, you will not be allowed to come back into the precinct with that piece of paper and cast your vote. If you walk out without putting it in the scanner, your vote will not be cast. So you have to do that. Do not walk out, because in effect, if you walk out, let's say somebody is deliberately trying to sabotage the machine, they walk out and they're smart enough that they got something in their car that has another barcode that they can go back in and scan it and affect the election. We won't allow you to do that because we've lost control of the ballot at that point. So make sure you scan it before you walk out. You can scan this right side up, upside down. You can scan the top of it, or you can scan the bottom of it. The machine will read it. Next slide, please. Okay, and then as it relates to seeing an example of how the voting machine works, make sure you go to securevotega.com. It'll give you a little small presentation on how the machine works. Next slide, please. All right, so before we get to Ed, let me just make sure that, Brother Langford, that I cover some of the other things that were talked about with either Brenda or Darryl. You heard them talk about the fact that if you go to a poll, Darryl Langford, you might even ask this question about if a poll manager is insisting that you can't vote in that precinct, what do you do? And Darryl is absolutely correct. You insist on a provisional ballot, and you contact the 1-800 number, but also let the election office know. Our goal is to make sure that we have poll workers out there that their job is to not only make sure that the process runs fairly, but they give everybody a chance to vote. If we have people that are working in the polls that do not want to follow those rules, person in the poll. Now, I can say this to you that I've been on this Board of Elections since 2011. I rarely do I hear where some of our poll workers have been deliberately trying to prevent people from voting. It may be a training issue, and if it's a training issue, we'll deal with it. If it's a consistent issue, then that person won't work in the polls anymore. The other thing that I say about Ms. Cox mentioned that you can request an absentee ballot 180 days beforehand. She also mentioned that we don't send them out until September the 15th. So I just want to reinforce that. You can request it 100 days in advance, but if you request it and you send it in on day number 160, we'll hold that until 45 days before the election before we send out the absentee ballot. Just be mindful of that. And then, Brother Langford, the last thing I want to talk about is the ballot boxes. We secured through the Board of Commissioners the funds to purchase 3 absentee ballot boxes. These boxes are designed such that we will have them in a secure location. They will be anchored to the ground, and we'll have 24/7 camera security surveillances over those boxes. Once we put the box up, we are required by law at least a week before election to empty that box every 72 hours. And we have to take 2 people with us to empty it. Has to be somebody that's certified by the elections office. And then those ballots have to be brought back. We have to complete a form saying that we received those ballots and document that we've gotten them and that we put them into they're in our possession and that we start putting them into the system. The week before election, we have to go every 24 hours to empty those boxes. And then the latest you can put absentee ballots in those boxes will be 7 p.m. on election day. At 7 p.m. on election day, we're required to go to every box, remove the ballots from the box, lock the boxes so that you can no longer put ballots in there, and then certify with the state that we've done just that. So those boxes will be secure and they will be up and running. Hopefully, unfortunately, everybody's trying to purchase the boxes. So it looks like we won't get the box. Hopefully we can get them before early voting start, but it may be a couple of days after early voting start before we get the boxes in place. One box will be at the county municipal complex right there by the commissioner's chambers. One box will be at the Peachtree City Library, and one box will be at the Tyrone Library. And you can take your ballots there. So if you have concerns about whether or not the postal services is going to deliver your ballot, you can drive to one of those boxes, and we'll have it on our website, the exact location. You can drive to one of those boxes and you can put your absentee ballot in there, and we will get your absentee ballot out. You can also, if you have a question about the status of your absentee ballot, you can go to My Voter page and to make sure that you have that. Brother Langford, that's all I have, and I hope that my connection hasn't been too disruptive.
No, it hasn't, not at all. I thank you, Brother Hicks, and appreciate your contribution to this effort. We're going to move on, and we're going to talk a little bit about census. Census is very important, and for to understand, they move the timeline up to get the census information to the president. So we have Brother Ed Reed, who is the program director for Fair Count, who will discuss the 2020 census information. Thank you, Brother Reed, for coming on board, and it's your show.
Thank you so much, Mr. Langford. Thank you to the brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity and those in Fayette County. So I'm going to try to keep it brief today. Thank you to Representative Jackson already making the pitch for the census. He's been a strong partner with us at Fair Count to spread the message about the importance of being counted in the census. So we appreciate all the work that he does. But I'm going to give you a quick overview of what the census is, why it's important, and kind of where we are with the timeline. So, we know the decennial census takes place every 10 years. It's one of those things that, we can often forget about very easily because we only do it every decade. It's the largest peacetime function of our government. So that is important to indicate in 2020 because we're going through a global pandemic right now. And so to undertake the largest peacetime function of our government during the global pandemic is no easy feat. Right, it takes a lot of resources and a lot of infrastructure to do, and so there have been significant challenges that exist with the 2020 census. We always like to lead with the census is a count of everyone living, breathing in the United States. Again, living, breathing in the United States. That is important to note because the citizenship question was something that was tried to be put on the census last year, but thankfully it did not make its way on. And so we're grateful for that, but it is not a count of every citizen. It's a count of every person that is living and breathing here in the United States. The census is safe. The enumerators, the door knockers that are going around now in Georgia, knocking on doors, they are sworn to keep the data confidential for their entire life. They can, it could lead up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine if that information is released. Your personal information is kept confidential with the Census Bureau for 72 years. So after 72 years, it is released and it's public information. Some of you may be familiar with Ancestry.com or some of those generational sites that you can go and track your lineage. That is tied directly to the census. So if you want generations to come to be able to track who's who and who was who back in the day, make sure that you are completing the census and we have an accurate and complete count. I'd like to explain the impacts of the census in 3 ways, in 3 buckets. The first bucket is the process of reapportionment and redistricting. And so reapportionment, we know, is the allocation of population that will determine the 435 congressional seats that exist across the country. That number 435 remains the same. However, the amount that each state gets does change periodically. And so there are a handful of states across the nation that are slated to pick up seats in Congress this year and some that are slated to lose seats. Georgia, for instance, is not slated to have any change. In 2010, Georgia did pick up some additional seats. And so that happens periodically with population change. As Representative Jackson alluded to earlier, the process by which the lines are redrawn from, anywhere from school board districts all the way up to the federal lines, that process is redistricting and will take place in 2021 by the states. So that's the first bucket. That's the first bucket of impacts. The second bucket is significant as well, and that's funding. And so those elected officials at the local level on this call, thank you for your service. You all will definitely know that the census is vitally and important for cities, counties, towns to be able to provide the necessary resources to their constituents and residents. The 2020 census will direct roughly $1.5 trillion annually to communities across the country. And that is across more than 300 federal programs. When we think about school and breakfast lunch programs, Head Start funding, Pell Grants, Medicaid, Medicare, WIC, SNAP, CHIP, disability assistance, transportation funding. So people complaining about potholes in their locality, being counted in the census will ensure that your city or county will have those resources. And so the last thing I'll note is the disaster recovery. As we go through hurricanes, tropical storms, pandemics, whatever it may be, earthquakes on the West Coast as of this morning, wildfires, the ability for the federal government to respond to those disasters rely on a fair and accurate count. And we know that, we will recover from COVID-19. We're not going to be in this COVID-19 world forever. But in order for us to fully recover and rebuild our communities, we'll need a fair and accurate count in the census. And so it's vitally important that we show up and show out and is seen and heard through being counted. The last bucket is one that is often left off the table and we don't talk about tremendously, and that is the economic development impacts. And so when businesses are looking to start up their business, relocate, they look at census data to drive their decisions. You know, they're not going to start up a business in an area where they may see the population is trending down. They're looking to see where the population is thriving, it's a diverse population. And so the only way they're able to make those determinants is if they have a fair and accurate account of who's living and residing in those areas. And so it's vitally important that we show up for those three buckets. The Census Bureau, likes to relate to some folks in populations as hard to count. And these are communities that are traditionally disenfranchised the most, also undercounted the most. But those are racial and ethnic minorities, highly mobile persons, young children, people who are experiencing homelessness, people who have mental or physical disabilities. And so at Fair Count, we are ensuring that those communities are being counted in this year's census count. Just some numbers I want to throw out. In Georgia, for every person that's not counted in the census, we lose $3,600 per person per year. Again, for every person not counted in the census, we lose $3,600 per person per year. Over the span of a decade, that's $36,000 just from one person not being counted. Just think about what we could do with that type of money in our communities. The Urban Institute estimated that there were 1.7 million Black people across the country that could go undercounted. 1.7 million. That would result in roughly $3.3 billion worth of lost resources. That would be, devastating to communities that are often already left out of funding formulas and mechanisms. And so it's really important that we're showing up in that way. I'll also note that Black men are historically one of the most undercounted populations. At Fair Count, we have an initiative called Black Men Count. You can find out more information about that at blackmencount.org. Again, blackmencount.org. Representative Jackson is a member of that complete count committee. Thank him. But in Georgia, there's an estimated 67,000 Black men that could be undercounted this year. 67,000, which would result in over $200 million worth of loss of funding into our communities. And sometimes people like to say, well, it's because Black men are locked up. But that's actually not the real reason in terms of the loss of revenue, because those that are incarcerated are actually counted for the purposes of the census through a different enumeration process. So that's not at all the reason. There are other significant reasons that may exist there, but want to make sure that Black men, that we show up and that we are counted. Now, pivoting into timeline, Mr. Langford mentioned that there was a change in the timeline. So initially, the census was supposed to be done at the end of July. Pandemic came, we extended it, or the Census Bureau extended it to October 31st. Late July, the administration came and said, oh, we think we can get it done sooner. Let's end it on September 30th. However, there was been significant challenges since that decision is made. They weren't able to hire as many door knockers. COVID-19 rates went up in a lot of communities that had low self-response rates. So right now, a lot of our African-American and minority communities are really struggling with their response rates compared to some of the other communities. And so we're really up against the wall, less than about a week and a half now left before the September 30th deadline. There are some lawsuits out there right now that will be reviewed next week, and with an attempt to try to get an injunction and extend it to October 31st, but we don't know where those will land. So we got to really keep up our efforts to ensure that folks are counted before September 30th. So thank you to the work that you all are doing there in Fayette County. I want to leave you with some information about where we are in Georgia as relates to numbers. Overall, Georgia is doing not as good as some of the peers. Out of the Southeast states, Georgia's probably doing the best. But across the country, the Southeast states are doing sort of the worst in terms of response rates. And we know that the majority of the African-American population reside in the Southeast states in the District of Columbia. So we have work to do there. But Fayette County has a response rate in the upper 70% of the percentage ratio, which is important to note because that is some of the highest in the state of the 159 counties in Georgia. We have some counties that are at 25, 28, 30% self-response rate now. So to be in the upper 70% is certainly something to be proud of. But, you know, there's still work to do to ensure that people are accounted and self-respond before that deadline. Georgia's self-response rate as a total is 61.5. There's an added enumeration rate to that where people have been enumerated through the door knocking campaign, which will get to a total enumeration in Georgia of about 88%. So we're not doing bad there with the help of the door knocking campaign. So I'll leave you with this. There are 3 ways that you can complete your census. You can, 1, complete that paper questionnaire that was sent to you, just mail it back in, get it done, get it over with. Or you can go online, my2020census.gov, takes less than 10 minutes to do. Or you can call 1-844-330-2020. Again, 1-844-330-2020 to do it over the phone. And, you know, just let's get it done so that we can get this political power, we can get the funding that our communities so desperately deserve. So thank you so much for having Faircount as a part of your forum today, and look forward to working with you to ensure that, you know, after the count is in, that we also have a fair and process through redistricting as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ed Reed. We really appreciate your input. And we have to understand how important the census is. It counts for so much. And, you know, by not doing the census, you know, you are not being counted. And as Mr. Reed said, a lot of money is being taken out of the community and out of your particular area because of it. So it's important that you're counted. It is important that you go through the census process so that you will be counted and we can be fair and we can be accurate, and our communities will be served properly. At this time, we have questions and answer. There is one question. That question is, what is the impact of reapportionment as it relates to gerrymandering?
Well, I'm happy to take this, and they work hand in hand, right? So if folks are not accounted for the purpose of the census, like Representative Jackson alluded to earlier, you can't get a fair and accurate redistricting process, because, you know, that process is looking at where the people are, who the people are, and not only where they are, but who they are. And that is important because the Supreme Court ruled that you know, drawing lines based on political parties or power is actually legal. It is illegal to do based on racial, racial confinements, but political confinements is fine. And so it is important that, you know, we have a good representation of where we are in our communities, so that when these lines are drawn, we are not left out of that representation or left out of that political power. Because as I mentioned, there are 435 seats across the nation. That number doesn't change, but the number of people, representatives in a state, that does change. And, you know, we don't want to be left out of the equation, left our voice off the table for being able to allocate for our communities when we need it the most. And so they definitely work hand in hand. You know, apportionment is the process in which the sort of the foundation in which redistricting is built on. So, you know, gerrymandering is something that takes place based on those counts and what the people are and who the people are that live in those communities.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reed. Again, if there's anything else, any other questions, hold on a second. Okay.
Yeah, and the only thing I would like to add, because Ed did a phenomenal job breaking it down. The only thing I would add, it also deals with power, right? We cannot forget that. I mean, they can draw lines where you can have candidates who were in completely separate districts. Now, all of a sudden, they fall into one district, and now they got to run against each other. right? That technique has been implemented again across southern states primarily, but it is a tool out there in order for them to achieve exactly what Mr. Reed described. So this has a lot to do with power and money.
All right, thanks, Brother Jackson. There's another question. The question is, will PPE be provided to poll workers? Ms. Darryl, are you still there?
I'll answer that, Darryl. The staff has been given PPE by the state, Secretary of State's office. We've also purchased our own. And then we also received quite a bit from Delta Sigma Theta. So we're going to have ample PPE products for our poll workers.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Brother Hicks. All right. Any other questions? Any other comments or anything that the panelists might want to mention that you feel that you left out?
I just want to say again, thank you on behalf of Fair Count and our organization for this forum. Actually, I learned a couple of things from some of the presenters here earlier on, so I appreciate the forum and the opportunity to be able to provide information. Fair Count, we are out in the communities. Even today, you saw my backdrop and my virtual background with our a bus that we had. We had to take that off the road due to the pandemic, but we're out in the communities providing PPE today to sites across the state of Georgia, but also providing information about how to complete your census and doing it in a safe way. And so we're out about, and I'm saying that because I'm gonna have to hop off here in a second to go to an event, but thank you for the work that you all continue to do. It's truly working in Fayette County, so you can be the model for some of the other counties in the surrounding areas as well to ensure that we get a fair and accurate count. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. We also appreciate you for taking the time out of your day to give us this information. It's great information. Okay, that is going to do it for today, unless there's any other questions or comments.
Brother Langford, if you don't mind, let me just.
Go ahead.
Brother Langford, if you don't mind, let me just sort of reiterate what Darryl Anderson has indicated, and even Brenda Cox, excuse me, has indicated. Provisional ballots. Do not allow a poll worker to turn you away. Those provisional ballots are important, especially if you're at the last hour or the last few minutes and you can't make it to your next poll location or your actual poll location. Do the provisional, and at the very least, you get a chance to vote for the statewide and county-wide offices. We take those provisional ballots and we certify whether or not they should be counted or not counted by the following Friday. So you vote on Tuesday. By Friday or Monday at the latest, we're having a meeting to certify those ballots. And every single ballot comes before the Board of Election. And we go through every last one of them to make sure staff has done what they should have done to verify and request information from the voter. So make sure you don't be turned away because somebody says that you can't vote. Thank you.
I tell you, this has cleared up a lot for me, questions that, that I've had before starting this forum, and there's a lot of good information. So I thank you, our panelists, Derrick Jackson, Darryl Hicks, Brenda Cox, Darryl Anderson, and Ed Reed. Thank you, and I'd also like to thank Langford Enterprises, our first run, for helping with all the technical and the information that you see on the screen. They did all that. So we appreciate their work as well.
And Brother Langford, just FYI, we need to thank also Brother Cooley and Brother President, Brother Hines.
Absolutely, Brother Cooley, Brother AC Cooley, who was also co-host. And keeping me informed on things that are going on, virtually. So I appreciate you. Awesome man with technology. And want to thank our brother President Earl Hines, for just being the leader that he is for Sigma Omicron Lambda. Right? Are there any other questions?
Brother Langford, just real quick, I apologize, but there's actually one more question that has come up. And the question is, what kind of accommodations are we making for disabled poll workers? And so if I understand the question correctly, obviously our room, wherever our poll precincts are, has to be ADA requirement, which means that the poll workers would be accommodated as well as voters. Even our machines have technology that will allow us to, if for example, somebody can't see, we have little, I call them little game controllers that they can use to make it bigger and better for them. So they can make that selection once they go into the poll. And if they don't know how, the poll workers can show them how to do that. But we're equipped to handle and work with whether it's a voter who has a disability or it's a poll worker who has a disability.
Okay. All right, good. Another question. Are the pre-filled voter applications that are being mailed to us by various organizations legitimate?
So I would say, and somebody else maybe want to chime in, but from our perspective, what I've said to folks who have written in and asked us that question at the Board of Election is that I've received them too. And from what I can tell, they seem to be a duplicate of the actual ballot. In some instances, they may have names filled in, and we're discovering that on some of them, for every middle name, they're putting the letter R. Don't know why they're doing that, but that will cause it to kick out if your middle initial is incorrect. So here's my recommendation to you. If you want to submit that, you have to look at it and make sure that it is completely accurate. If it's not accurate, I wouldn't do it. My unofficial suggestion is print your own and fill it out. Now, if you want to use their prepaid envelope and stick it in the mail and it comes to Fayette County, that's fine. Some of them use prepaid envelopes and it goes to the Secretary of State's office. That's not going to do anything but delay it. They're going to send it there and the Secretary of State's going to have to send it to us. I would only use their envelope if it comes to the Fayette County location. I would double check and triple check the information that's on there. And better yet, on the sake to be on my own and do my own. You can print that off my voter page. So I print my own and send my own in as opposed to using the ones that have been sent out to me.
Okay.
And Brother Langford, if I may add to Brother Hicks, I definitely agree. You should print your own and complete it. Here's the reason why, because in the state of Georgia, we have the exact match legislation, as I shared with you all earlier. If the system have a mismatch, that is going to create a problem for you. So if we can mitigate any potential problems on the front end, so that way everyone that's exercising their right to vote will have a great experience. Print your own ballot, complete it, and triple check it, as Brother Hicks said. And again, if you are alarmed by any potential voter suppression tactic, please, ma'am, please, sir, call 888-730-5816. Again, that's the voter protection hotline. Let me repeat it one more time. That's 888-730-5816.
Okay, thank you, Brother Jackson.
This is recorded, so will you redistribute this? If so, where could the audience possibly share this with others? Because, you know, you have other fraternities and sororities who are online attending this event, just so they know where they can share this information and forward it on to others.
This will be on our Sigma Omicron Lambda public page, and you know, and actually we're going to run it consistently so that people can consistently see it. If they want to get information, they can get information. So that's a place where and there's also a link provided for our page for that. All right. Does that work for you, Brother Jackson?
Yes, that's perfect. Just so our audience know where they can find this recording and forward it on to other organizations. I know, like for example, Miss Brenda Cox is also a member of the NAACP local chapter, and we have attendees who are also affiliated with other organizations, so that way they can forward this information on as well.
Okay. I'm putting the link in the chat, and they can go directly to that page, and that page will take you to this presentation. Are there any other questions? Any other comments? Okay, I thank you all for coming today to share in the Voteless People is a Hopeless People Forum for Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the Sigma Omicron Lambda chapter here in Fayetteville, and also Fayette County and Coweta County. Again, thank you, and y'all have a great day.